Chapter 17 of The Law of the Honey Bee by Tickner Edwards. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Beekeeping and the Simple Life. It is a quality of English sunshine that it comes and goes capriciously, so that no man may be sure of the comradeship of his shadow from day to day. But when there is sunshine in England, it always seems an abiding permanent force. The grey of yesterday and the patter song of the rain on the leaves were only a dream. You were sleeping under the changeless blue of a summer night, and had but a vision of weeping, drab skies, gone now with the joy that comes in the morning. And to-morrow, when perhaps the old wild scurry of storm cloud is alive overhead, and all the house resounds with the runnel music from the pouring eaves, still it will be only a dream. Of a surety you will tell yourself so, as the sun breaks through the griddle of cloud, and the wind relents, and the Dutchman can get to his tailoring. And when you are stepping out amidst the swamp and glitter and rehabilitation of life, as glad of it all as the finches and butterflies that sweep on before you down the lane. The sun shines. You know it has always shone, changeless as time itself. With such a faith, unfounded and therefore incontestable, I came under the glow of one brave June morning, threading field after field of blossoming clover, until I stood at the gate of the bee garden over against the hill. With its name I had long been familiar, for in the county paper there was always the little 5-line advertisement, quaintly worded, announcing honey for sale. But I had never yet seen it, nor, indeed, ever set foot in this part of the good Sussex land. So, on this brimming June morning, giving rein for once to the indolent Shanks's mare of moods that is fated to carry me, I set out into the bright sloth, the joyous hastelessness of the day, and came at length to my destination, to the bee garden that nestles under the green downland hills. It was girt about with a tall hedge of hawthorn, smothered in snow-like blossom, with just that rosy tinge upon it which is the first hectic of decay. Beyond the hedge I could see, stretching aloft, green apple boughs, whose full-blown posies were alive with the desperate humming energy of countless bees. There was a blue wisp of smoke trailing idly away from a chimney stack, all that could be seen of the snug thatched cottage within, and there were voices, a leisurely baritone, a sudden peal of laughter, high-pitched and obviously a woman's, and now and then a bar or two or an old song sung in an intermittent, absent-minded way. In one of the pauses of this song I raised the latch of the gate. Its sharp click drew to its full, lean height a figure at the end of the garden, which was bending down in the midst of a wilderness of hives. As the man came towards me coatless, his rolled-up shirt-sleeves baring wiry brown arms to the hot June sun, I took in all the busy, quiet picture. The red-tiled, winding path, the sea of old-fashioned garden flowers on every hand, billows of lilac and red may and laburnum, shadowy blue deeps of forget-me-nots, scarlet tulips amidst them like lighthouses, and drifting shallows of amber mignonette. A decent house stood hard by, its windows bright and clean as diamond facets. There was a gay flicker of linen on a line beyond. An old dog lolled in a straw-filled barrel. A cat kept company with a milk jug on the spotless doorstep. And everywhere there were beehives, each of a different harmonious shade of colour, not ranged in stilted rows, but scattered here and there in twos and threes in the orderless order beloved of bees and unsuburban men. The bee-master had keen grey eyes, set deep in a sun-blackened, honest face, and the ever-ready tongue of him was that of the beeman all the world over. He was ripe and willing to talk of his work, explaining what he was and what he had done, as we slowly wandered through his domain. He was a Londoner, he told me. At least, that was his fate half a dozen years ago, a city clerk, pale as the ledger leaves that fluttered through his fingers from 9 to 6 of the working day. And at home in a dreary desert of housetops called Nunhead, whither may an unkind fate never lure me, his sisters sewed for a living, white-faced as himself. But one day, in an old second-hand bookshop, he lit upon a threepenny treasure, a book on the management of bees. He read it as his train crawled homeward on one stifling, freezing, fog-bound winter's night, and there and then, in the mean, dirty cattle-box of a third-class carriage, in fancy was inaugurated the bee garden that has since developed into all I saw around me on that brave morning in June. It was a long time in the doing, he told me, as we sauntered among the busy hives, speaking with a delightful Sussex intonation already veneered upon his Cockney brogue, a long and weary and scraping time. There was money to be saved, the capital needed for the enterprise, and this was no easy matter out of a total family income of 40 shillings a week. But at last it was done, and well done. There came a day when the three of them shook the dust of Nunhead from their feet and took over possession of the little tumble-down cottage with its bare half-acre of neglected ground. Well, those were hard times to begin with, he said, with an unaccountable relish in the recollection. But now, look how all has changed. He waved a triumphant, proudly proprietary arm about him. The cottage was sound and well furnished throughout. The 3 or 4 bought hives with which he had started his business had multiplied into 60 or 70, all made by his own hands. Where had he got the bees? Well, that threepenny book had taught him a secret, the art of bee driving. Nearly all the cottages for miles round were in the habit of sulphuring their bees to get at the honey. The first autumn, and every autumn since then, he had gone to his neighbours and told them he would take the bees out of the hives for them, and leave them all the combs and a good trinkgeld into the bargain, if they would let him have the bees for his trouble. And they were more than willing, and thus he had gradually built up his little principality of hives. But the profit of the thing? This, indeed, was nothing much to boast of. He sold all the honey and wax he got, sending it away for the most part by post, and extending the circle of his custom by little and little with every year. Taking the bad years with the good, he had made a net return of £2 for every hive. In bumper seasons it was always much more. It was not a great deal, but there were only 3 of them, and their wants were simple. Their greatest needs, fresh air, peace and quiet, the healthful life of the country, these were to be had for nothing at all. And as for clothes, you never know, until you give over trying to keep up appearances, how very little appearances count in the world. At any rate, for them, the whole thing was a complete success. There were men round about that countryside who farmed whole provinces and still grumbled. But here was he, getting peace and plenty from half an acre. And as for the girls, they did nothing but laugh and sing all day long. Thus we wandered and talked, and I, feigning ignorance of bee matters, lest he might think I was but carrying coals to Newcastle in clumsy charity, bought honey, and asked many questions, and slowly the entire meaning of what had been done by these emancipated slaves of city clerkdom was revealed. The bee-master pushed his old straw hat back over his clever forehead, and lit the most comfortable pipe I had ever set eyes on. He had evidently thought the whole thing out long ago, and got it down to its essential elements. "What we are doing here," he said, "could be done by hundreds of others who are still in London in what was once our old plight. Large bee farms are all very well, but they are more or less a thing of the future, something that is still to be evolved out of 20th century needs. But the bee garden has its immediate use and place in every district where there is an average population. People generally have got out of the habit of eating honey because it is so seldom on sale in the shops. But if you steadily and continuously remind them of it, they will buy, and soon grow to wonder how they did without it for so long. But it must be set before them in an attractive way. Run honey must be bright and pure to look at, and neatly bottled and labelled. If you sell honey in the comb, the section boxes must be spotlessly clean and white. In that old book that first led me to beekeeping, it says that only the English bee should be kept, because it is a better honey gatherer. But, from the salesman's point of view, there is a much more weighty reason for abjuring all foreign strains of bees. English bees leave a thin film of air between the honey and the cell cappings, and the result is that the comb always looks perfectly white. But nearly all foreigners fill their cells to the brim, and this means that the finest honeycomb will have a dark and dirty appearance, and no one will be tempted to buy. That is the sort of thing a business man thinks of first, so the old training days in London have not been altogether without their use even here. The song, aloof and desultory, that I had heard from the garden gate, was growing clearer as we walked, and now we turned the house corner and came upon more hives, with a neat girlish figure busy among them, and, hard by, a tiny laundry shed, wherein I caught a glimpse of brown arms deep in a wash-tub, and heard the last stanza of the vagueless song. "Hetty there," explained the bee-master, "helps in the garden, and, Helps, did I say? Why, she is far and away a better hand at it than I. There is so much in hive work that needs the light touch which only a woman can give. And Deborah, she keeps house for us. Did you know that the word Deborah was Hebrew for a honey bee? But come and see, where I make the hives on winter days, and where we sling the honey and fill the super crates with the sections and all the rest of it. He showed me then his workshop, and a little gauze windowed shed where there was a homemade honey extractor, a cunning centrifugal thing by which the combs could be emptied and restored unbroken to the bees, to be charged again and again. And there was a storehouse, where long rows of honey jars and stacks of sections and blocks of pale yellow wax were waiting for the purchaser, and a packing shed where the post boxes of corrugated cardboard were made up. Finally there was pointed out to me, in a far-off corner of the garden, a donkey, shaggy, well-fed, placidly browsing, and, under a neighbouring pent roof, a little cart that was a curiosity in its way. Its wooden tilt was made to represent a big beehive, and on it was painted the name of the bee garden, and a list of hive products which it carried for sale. The bee master put an admiring hand upon it. It was all Hetty's idea, he said. London girls for pluck, you know, and she goes into the town with it once a fortnight in the season, takes it away crammed full, mind, and never brings back an ounce. Somehow or other, I think those girls ought to change names. Journeying back to the railroad station under the eternal English sunshine and through the chain of blossoming fields, I listened to the chant of the bees around me, and though it was the familiar sound of a lifetime, there was something in it then which I had never heard before. The rich note rose and fell, died down to silence as the path led through impregnable red clover, swelled again as the land paled to the rosy hue of the sainfoin, burst out into a loud glad symphony where a patch of charlock blent its despised uncoveted gold with the farmer's drill. You thought you knew our ways of life from Alpha to Omega, so seemed to run in fancy the wavering refrain. You have pried upon us day and night, in season and out of season. You have chloroformed us, vivisected us, torn our dead sisters limb from limb to feed the cruel glittering eyes of that binocular of yours. You have come at last to think that there was nothing about us, within or without or round about, that you had not got to know. And here a common city clerk, turned tail on his hereditary duty, has shown you in one short hour a whole sheaf of things about us which you, peeping Tom that you are, in a whole life's keyhole prying, have never guessed. Out upon you! You deserve to have to do with nothing better than bumblebees for the rest of your days. For the more I thought of little bee gardens, such as the one I had just visited, established here, there, and everywhere throughout the land, the plainer it became that this, after all, was a mission for the honey bee that had quite escaped me, and the fonder of the idea I grew. With beekeeping on a grand scale, there was the difficulty that an apiary might become too large for the resources of the country about it, although it is all but certain that crops grown specially for bees can be made to pay. But a small garden could never exhaust the land within its necessary 3-mile radius, and all the nectar its bees could gather would be obtained free. Nunhead has done it gloriously, thought I, tramping steadily onward through the clover. And why not all the other Nunheads that hem in the great cities? There must be plenty who love the dust and din, and are willing to stop there. So the little band of bee gardeners will never be missed. And there was something else I thought of too, as I strode along under the English sunshine, which lasts for ever, swinging my box of superfluous yet much prized honey as I went. The song and that pleasant ripple of laughter, they were in my ears still, and mingling with the labour song of the wayside bees. Now, only a dozen miles or so away over the hilltops in the blue Sussex Weald, I knew of just such another bee garden, where 2 brothers, not Londoners this time, but true-born downland lads, had well established themselves, were getting comfortably off, but were still single men. And only a week ago they had deplored this fact to me. But hold, matchmaking was never yet to be reckoned part of the law of the honey bee. End of chapter 17. End of the Law of the Honey Bee by Tickner Edwards.